In many ways, there is nothing more human than telling a scary story. Whether we're considering what happens in the foggy valleys, pondering what goes on underneath the inky black depths of a lake or the ocean itself, or even trying to consider the beings that exist beyond the torchlight or the warm, safe glow of a campfire, folk horror continues to move us. Hello, I'm Kyle Ott from Desks and Dorks. Couple things. If you feel like we've earned it, a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe goes quite a long way. If you really want to support us, you can of course get any of the role-playing games that we publish in the description below. Again, that is the exact best way that you can help us to keep the lights on. But without further ado, let's talk about folk horror. This video will be split into two parts: why folk horror continues to move us, and the second part, how you can incorporate folk horror or folk horror themes and mechanics into any role-playing game that you make or run. Now, when I'm talking about folk horror, the first thing that I think of is that its monsters generally tend to defy explanation, whether we're talking about paragons of modern folk horror like the Leshens from Witcher 3, to analog horror like the one that I grabbed from here, which I consider to be a modern version of folk horror. These things often are left to the imagination. We might get small details or little moments with these creatures, but for the most part, their very nature, their powers, their impact, and the danger they present are left to our imaginations. This winds up being incredibly effective because, as most people who write or read cosmic horror will know, the human mind is far more capable of generating terrors than anything a writer could come up with. This means that when you are reading this type of horror, your brain is going to fill in the blanks, and your imagination is going to make a creature far more terrifying than anything the writer could conjure up. It's one of the reasons and one of the ways that folk horror in particular continues to be as interesting and as attention-grabbing now as it has been over hundreds and hundreds of years. And that hundreds and hundreds of years thing actually does matter. It matters because in many ways, folk horror is a continuation of what our earliest ancestors were doing ever since the creation or the formation of spoken language, right? Community building and community activities often took the forms of storytelling. Storyteller was both a real position that could happen in a tribe or in the earliest forms of societal organization, and because of that, there is a real, I think, genuine connection between us as people and folk horror, even if it's not something that we can fully explain. In addition to its communicative nature, it's something that demands to be added onto. I would venture to say that most people watching this video or listening to this video, depending on how you choose to consume our content, has probably participated in a ghost story around a campfire, and maybe, just maybe, and I'm going to guess likely, you may have added onto or embellished on that story when you used it later on in your life. There is something naturally human and naturally community focused about storytelling, and particularly about scary stories and folk horror. It's both personable in that it relates directly to us as people, and it's easy to personalize. I know for myself, I've definitely customized some ghost stories to some groups of friends, and I'm willing to bet that more than a fair number of folks that watch this will have a similar experience. Another reason that folk horror continues to grab our active imaginations goes back to what I was saying earlier. A sense of mystery is exactly what keeps things appealing. As human beings, our minds are wired to want to solve problems and to create connections, sometimes where there are none. And in that respect, the inherent mystery of folk horror is almost like a natural catnip to the human brain. And this goes beyond the threats in folklore, right? The monsters themselves, as we mentioned, should and are often left up to the imagination, but there's other things and other elements as well. The weaknesses and the abilities, the impact of these creatures, yes, those are shrouded in mystery, but let's not forget that their creation, or the lore surrounding these beasts, is often up for interpretation and reinterpretation, thus causing a, shall we say, never-ending mystery that stretches on throughout the centuries. And the last reason that I think that folk horror is so compelling is that most of the time, or at least in many cases, folk horror generally tends to center on and focus on themes of isolation. Whether we're talking about the lone hiker traveling down the hills at night, to the young, spry, daring individual that ventures into a haunted house alone, A lot of folk horror generally tends to focus on lone characters braving the terrors of the night by themselves. Human beings are wired to seek community. Even the most introverted among us do need some amount of it. It is a natural part of being human. And folk horror plays on this beautifully, because in many cases, its characters and its themes focus on isolation, either from the community, from a family, from friends, or even from oneself. And those themes of isolation, I think, are what helps to create both a sense of terror and mystery, but also to keep us coming back to the wonders of folk horror. Again, for many people, the greatest terror of all is being alone, and isolation generally tends to breed superstition and fear. But how, you might be wondering, can we as game masters, as game writers, as game designers, how can we use elements of folk horror to help us in our role-playing games? Well, I'm so glad you asked. The first thing that I want to do is I want you to focus on damage needing to come after investigation. Regardless of the system that you are running, whether it's, again, Vaesen, Symbaroum, Call of Cthulhu, Cult, Divinity Lost, those systems I think do very well with elements of folk horror. But even if you're using something like Morkborg or Dungeons & Dragons, I think you should allow for elements of this. What I mean by damage comes after investigation is very simple. A creature, the foe, the main antagonist the party finds themselves against cannot be harmed unless the party has found, in this very simple rudimentary model, the location of the thing, its power, and its major weakness. They cannot damage this threat in any way, shape, or form unless they have already assembled those three pieces. This allows the players to A, ramp up a sense of mystery in their own heads, B, increase the power of the actual threat itself, and C, make it so that your players need to engage with the deeper lore, and in doing so, fire up their own imaginations. In many cases, when I have done this, I have actually tied in other players' ideas and concepts into the creatures that I had, even after the creature was already designed, or even after I already had an idea for what I wanted for the creature. In many ways, it was much scarier to add elements that the players had come up with without realizing that that's exactly what they were doing. They were kind of helping me to design this monster as the game progressed. Another thing that you can do is you can hype up that sense of isolation. You can make a mechanic where players become exhausted by the presence of their fellows. This is an interesting idea. You could either A, relate this to the superstitious nature of the town or environment the players occupy, or make it a power or ability of the creature itself. I like this idea because it really does sort of gamify the sense of societal isolation and exhaustion that oftentimes coincides with these stories. Now, if you don't feel like doing that, the one way that you can isolate them is by using the metagame to your advantage. Before I tell you what this is, please make sure that you confer with your players before using this method to make sure that they are okay with it, because this is a trader mechanic. You're going to deal out cards to each player, and one of those cards means that the player is now going to be in league with the monster. This works best for one-shots, for example. However, I think it could be really interesting if you're going to use it in, say, I don't know, a regular RPG or something along those lines, but just make sure that your players are all right with it before you implement it. And if you want to go the extra mile to really ramp up that sense of isolation, tell them there's a traitor card, and then don't actually put a traitor card in there, and watch them sort of struggle and isolate themselves as they try to figure out exactly what's going on. And last but certainly not least, because I want to bring in the community sense of stuff into our RPGs, I call this the story chain. This is something that I actually used in a classroom setting, but have each player create one aspect of their foe in isolation of one another. And what I mean by that is this. Tell one player, hey, you're responsible for what this creature wants to eat. What does this monster want to mow down on in order to keep itself alive? What weaknesses does the monster have? That's what another player does. What environment does this monster usually like to live in? If you really want to amp this up, and again, to increase the sense of mystery and intrigue, tell everybody to contribute 2 potential ideas, but don't tell the players which ideas you're using, and leave them ambiguous throughout the game. This means that the players are going to know that you are using one of their contributing ideas, but even they are not sure which one, and it should go without saying that this is character knowledge, player knowledge, not character knowledge. You can combine that, of course. You can have it so that one person's character and the player who gave that idea both know what's going on, but this is not something that they should share with the other players at the table. Again, you want to amp up that sense of mystery, and in this case, bring in your community as well, which I think is going to help to not only add in a sense of buy-in to your stories, but also make it just a little bit more terrifying to know the players are being hunted by a beast of their own creation. That is the end of our video, my friends. I hope sincerely that you have enjoyed this one. If you have, again, a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe goes a metric ton in the way of supporting this channel. It really does mean a lot to me. I really appreciate all of the feedback everyone's been leaving in the comments of the last couple videos. Thank you to everybody who helped get our gold video to almost 20k views. That's insane for a very small channel like us. It is not something that I expected that was going to happen, but I'm really supremely grateful. So thank you all so much. If you would like to get involved, Discord is there. If you really want to give us some support, you can purchase the games that we publish in the description below. But again, you're all absolutely fantastic. And until next time, I'm Kyle for Desks and Dorks. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.